Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're attempting what feels like an intellectual and spiritual balancing act.
It really is.
We are taking a single global leader, Narendra Modi, and we're analyzing his decade-plus dominance over India. But not just through the usual lens of, politics and economics.
No, we have a stack of sources that go much, much deeper. They incorporate everything from conventional analysis to ancient Hindu prophecy and some very profound spiritual critique.
It is, and I don't think this is an exaggeration, one of the most intellectually sprawling deep dives we've ever faced.
Absolutely. We have to be able to move seamlessly from the granular details of infrastructure spending and corruption indices all the way to the vast multi-millennial sweep of cosmic cycles.
And then on top of that, deliver a very controversial critique of religious history, all while maintaining, and this is key for you listening, strict impartiality.
That's the mission.
Okay, so let's unpack the core premise right from the start, because it really dictates the entire scope of this deep dive. The sources frame the central challenge as this: stabilizing India.
And we need to just pause on that for a second. The sheer magnitude of that task.
It's immense. You're talking about the world's most populous nation, 1.4 billion people. They're carrying the weight of, historical inherited poverty.
And staggering diversity. I mean, hundreds of dialects, over 20 official languages. It's almost incomprehensible.
And on top of that, deeply entrenched, systemic corruption, and a colonial legacy that left many of its institutions brittle.
And that diversity isn't just linguistic. It's religious, it's regional, it's ideological.
Yeah.
So to govern a system like that effectively, little and stabilize it.
Well, the sources claim it's arguably the single most challenging assignment in modern global governance.
It's an exercise in scale management that it dwarfs nearly every other political entity on the planet.
It really does.
So the sources suggest that just being a good bureaucrat or having, smart economic policies is completely insufficient for a task like this. What specific ingredients do they argue were necessary for this stabilization to even begin? They argue that the sheer difficulty of the job demands something much rarer than policy expertise. It requires a fundamental shift in the moral gravity of the leadership itself.
Okay, what does that mean in practical terms? Moral gravity.
Specifically, the sources claim that success here requires, and this is a direct quote, moral authority, relentless discipline, and a sense of mission that transcends personal ambition.
So it's about the character of the leader, not just their policies.
Exactly. The analysis posits that Prime Minister Modi arrived with this exact combination, and that it fundamentally changed the psychological contract between the state and its citizens.
So our mission today is complex. We're essentially navigating three distinct interwoven layers that define the source material's understanding of India's transformation. And we invite you, the listener, to travel with us across these levels of analysis.
The first layer is the pragmatic. We have to establish the verifiable political, economic, and security achievements since 2014. What exactly was stabilized and how was it done? This is the tangible foundation for everything else.
Right, the facts on the ground. Then the second layer is the personal. Here we look at the unique, transformational nature of the leader himself. Why do the sources claim he is consistently the most popular politician in the world?
And we'll explore his personal persona, this idea of the monk administrator, and how that persona drives the resilience and the durability of his support across India's incredibly fractious political landscape.
And finally, we get to the most intellectually challenging and, I think, provocative layer, which is the prophetic.
This is where we move entirely beyond conventional political analysis. We'll investigate the arguments that link Modi's governance directly to Sanatana Dharma, the cosmic transition from the Kali Yuga,
The age of strife.
to the Satya Yuga, the age of truth. And it even gets into ancient prophecies involving divine archetypes like Hanuman and Kalki.
And as we move into those final sections, we will be analyzing a radical and very sensitive counterpoint presented in our sources. It's a spiritual critique that frames another major world religion, Islam, as an anti-religion, arguing it's a cunning deception.
And the source then uses that critique to propose a unified path forward, one involving a kind of Hindu-Jewish prophetic fulfillment.
It is a dense, often intense mix, and we promise to guide you through these complex claims meticulously, reporting only on the arguments and the internal logic that's provided by the source material itself.
So let's begin where all political journeys must, with the political and economic conditions that defined India before this period of stabilization.
All right, let's rewind the clock to the pre-2014 era. The sources characterize this period not just as one of, slow growth, but as a time of national malaise, a genuine governmental drift. What was the specific burden India was carrying that required such a radical stabilization?
Well, the sources are incredibly blunt about it.
Oh.
India was suffering from a deep structural stagnation, and it was underpinned by a real decay in its institutions.
So not just a bad economy, but a sick system.
Exactly. A nation burdened by decades of drift and mismanagement. Economically, the country was a walking contradiction. The state would pay lip service to socialist ideals, to talk about equity and central planning, but the reality on the ground was profound, personalized cronyism.
And that cronyism created an economy that just wasn't efficient.
It wasn't just inefficient, it benefited a very, very small, well-connected elite. It was a closed loop.
And this is where that specific terminology from the source material is so crucial. They talk about the devastating impact of the license Raj. We really need to break that term down because it explains the whole mechanism of the corruption.
It's the key. The license Raj was this highly centralized system of mandatory governmental permits, licenses, and quotas. You needed them for literally every single stage of economic activity.
Every stage, like what?
Like starting a business, manufacturing a product, expanding a factory, importing raw materials, anything. And while it was ostensibly designed to manage the economy,
There's always a good intention at the start.
right? But the source specifies that this regulatory framework had utterly hardened into rent extraction.
Okay, let's unpack that phrase, harden into rent extraction. What does that look like on the ground for, say, a business owner trying to get something done?
It meant that the primary purpose of the regulation was no longer about ensuring safety or environmental standards or fairness. The rulebook itself became a mechanism to create artificial scarcity and intentional bottlenecks.
So the system was designed to slow things down.
Deliberately. Imagine your business needs 10 permits to operate. The bureaucrat in charge of permit number 5 deliberately stalls for 6 months. He just sits on your file. So you have two choices. Wait and die economically. Or you pay a bribe. You pay a rent just to get him to move the file from one side of his desk to the other. And so corruption ceased to be a side effect of government. It became the fundamental operating procedure, especially at the highest levels.
So the system wasn't just corrupt, it actively incentivized, almost mandated corruption. It was systemic.
Absolutely. And the sources also point to a critical failure in the security context that really mirrored this institutional drift.
Okay, so how did that manifest?
On the security front, the sources argue that terrorism and external threats were managed primarily through rhetoric rather than resolve.
All talk.
All talk. India had cultivated this doctrine of strategic restraint. Now, restraint can be a very prudent foreign policy tool. But the sources argue that in India's case, it had blurred dangerously into strategic paralysis.
And what was the practical, the debilitating consequence of that kind of paralysis? What did it signal to the world?
Well, when a major terror attack occurred, the institutional response was typically limited to issuing condolences and dossiers.
That's it. Thoughts and prayers and paperwork.
Essentially, mourning the dead and compiling reports for international bodies rather than executing swift, decisive, and punitive action against the perpetrators or their state sponsors.
And that kind of ambiguity must have been debilitating.
It was, both internally because it eroded national confidence, and externally because it signaled to adversaries that the cost of attacking India was absorbable, manageable. It was a clear sign of a government that had lost its will and its capacity to act decisively.
So you have economic paralysis rooted in this institutionalized graft, and you have strategic paralysis rooted in a failure of will. It really does sound like a country just waiting for a fundamental shock to the system. How did the sources say this stabilization actually began?
And this is where the analysis turns, really, to the leader's personal conduct. The sources suggest the first step was, on the surface, deceptively simple.
No, was it?
It was the physical act of presence and of setting a personal standard.
Yeah.
In their words, he showed up.
Showing up. That seems vague, but I'm guessing the sources use it to mean much more than just being physically present. It implies a change in behavior, doesn't it?
It implies a total change of behavior. It was the imposition of a radically different personal standard. The leader became, and was seen to be, visibly punctual, tireless, and austere.
And that alone established a new operational ecosystem.
Instantly. The most immediate revolutionary effect, the source claims, was the end of corruption at the central cabinet level. And this was achieved remarkably, without needing dramatic purges or new laws overnight.
Now that's the real puzzle. How can you end entrenched high-level graft without prosecuting dozens of people or passing comprehensive new anti-corruption legislation first? It seems impossible.
This is a perfect illustration of what the sources, and I think what political scientists might call signal theory in governance.
Signal theory.
When the person occupying the absolute peak of the power pyramid is visibly, unequivocally incorruptible, that single signal instantly recalibrates the incentives for every single person beneath them.
So the incentive structure completely changes. If the prime minister is austere, arriving on time, working 16 hours a day, and not taking kickbacks, what message does that send to a cabinet minister who is used to a more, let's say, leisurely and profitable existence?
The message is existential. Ministers suddenly realized the era of casual graft and rent-seeking was over. Not because a new law was passed with new penalties, but because the boss embodied an entirely different, unrelenting standard.
And the sources are very specific about his personal life reinforcing this.
Very specific. The PM's personal life is famously ascetic. He governs not as a political operative looking for personal gain, but as a monk administrator.
This monk administrator distinction is critical because it's a direct contrast to the established political culture, not just in India, but in many places. How do the sources articulate the difference between a dynast and a monk administrator?
Well, in dynastic politics, power is typically seen as an inheritance. It's an entitlement, it's a reward for your lineage or past service, and it's often accompanied by great wealth and comfort.
Right, it's a prize to be won.
Exactly. The sources state that for Modi, power is fundamentally treated as obligation. His personal discipline, rising early, working long hours, his simple lifestyle, is interpreted not as some kind of political theater, but as the rigorous fulfillment of that obligation. He is duty-bound, not self-seeking.
And that distinction, power as duty rather than birthright.
That is what provided the psychological stabilization necessary for the deeper economic reforms that were to follow. You had to fix the moral foundation first.
It's fascinating. The restoration of moral authority at the very top allowed the technical reforms to finally take hold. So what was the nature of the economic pivot that followed this psychological stabilization?
The sources claim that India finally, after decades, shed the rhetorical remnants of a stagnation-inducing socialism.
All that lip service we mentioned earlier.
Gone. For decades, India was philosophically trapped by this state-controlled model that, ironically, only produced vast inequality and institutionalized the very cronyism it claimed to oppose.
So what did the pivot look like?
The pivot was radical and unambiguous. It focused entirely on three things: scale, speed, and systems.
Which really means moving from bureaucratic red tape to measurable, accountable delivery. And the primary vehicle for that was infrastructure, right? Both physical and digital.
Precisely. Infrastructure, which for most of India's history was an afterthought, always lagging in planning, funding, and execution, it moved to the absolute center. It became, in the source's words, the backbone of governance.
And this wasn't just about building a few more roads.
No, this is about laying the fundamental groundwork for modern commerce and, just as importantly, for national integration, connecting the country in a real, tangible way.
And this is where the sources offer truly concrete, very impressive benchmarks. We need to detail these specific comparisons that suggest India isn't just improving, but it's actually challenging global bests.
Yes, this is where it gets very specific. They argue that in certain key metrics, particularly in infrastructure execution speed and efficiency, India has dramatically changed its global standing. The sources cite direct comparisons. We are talking about highway construction and operational efficiency that, they claim, rivals Germany's. We are talking about urban mass transit systems and metro networks that echo London and Paris in their scale, their modernity, and their cleanliness.
Which is a huge leap. And then, most strikingly, in the digital realm, the sources claim India has created something truly unique.
Yes. They refer to the digital public infrastructure. So that's the UPI system for immediate payments, the Aadhaar digital identity system. This combined infrastructure, this digital stack, is claimed to be unmatched anywhere in the world.
Think about that. The speed, the scale, and the extremely low cost of instantaneous transactions across a country of 1.4 billion people.
It's a level of digital inclusion that you could argue most developed nations are still struggling to fully implement. It's a genuine game changer.
And this pivot, this whole transformation, profoundly recenters India in the global development conversation. It offers a distinct path forward, especially when you contrast it with China.
Yes, China has long been the dominant model for the developing world, particularly in Africa.
Yeah. And the source makes a profound and very strategic contrast here.
It does. China's model offers growth without democracy. It often relies on authoritarian certainty, to achieve these massive infrastructure projects very quickly. The trade-off is clear. You get efficiency, but at the expense of political freedom and dissent.
But India, in this framework, offers something completely different: development with debate.
That is the essential quality. India demonstrates that the so-called messiness of a democratic system, the protests, the parliamentary debates, the judicial challenges, it's not a sign of weakness. It's actually a critical feature of resilience.
So while authoritarian systems might be faster out of the gate,
Democracy legitimizes the outcomes. It ensures the structures you create are resilient to the whims of a single leader or a single party. This is why the sources position India's rise as civilizational in character, not imperial.
meaning it's not seeking to dominate, but to lead by example.
Exactly. It seeks global leadership by becoming a trusted, resilient pole in an increasingly unstable world. It acts as an example of trust, rather than just another agent of extraction.
And that robust foundation, the eradication of central graft, the physical and digital infrastructure revolution, and the establishment of this resilient democratic development model is what transitions us perfectly to the second phase of our deep dive: understanding the source of the leader's unprecedented personal appeal. So we move now from these verifiable policy achievements to the phenomenon of sustained mass popularity. The sources are absolutely unambiguous. Narendra Modi has consistently ranked as the most popular politician in the world since 2014. We have to grasp the sheer scale, the intensity, and the durability of that appeal.
We really do. This cannot be overstated. We are talking about a level of dominance that spans nearly a decade in a political environment that is inherently vociferous.
What do you mean by that, vociferous?
It means it has a tendency to break apart. It's vast, multilingual, multi-religious, and arguably the world's most competitive and volatile democracy. To maintain mass popularity in India for this long is, historically, unprecedented.
Leaders usually peak early, right, and then they suffer severe attrition because of the constant conflicting demands of the system.
Exactly. But his support has proven incredibly resilient. It has weathered significant economic slowdowns, the shock of demonetization, the enormous challenge of the global pandemic, and shifting geopolitical turbulence.
So what do the sources cite as the root of this durability? It can't just be good policy.
No. The resilience, the source suggests, stems not from successful policy outcomes alone, but from legitimacy rooted in perceived intent.
Perceived intent. So it's about what the people believe his motivations are.
Overwhelmingly, the public believes that his actions are guided by a genuine sense of national and moral purpose, irrespective of whether a short-term policy succeeds or fails. This personal trust acts as a crucial buffer against political attacks and policy setbacks.
And this leads us to this striking paradox within Indian politics that the source highlights. They call it the personal credibility gap.
Yes, and it's the defining political signature of this entire era. The source explicitly claims that Narendra Modi is more popular than his own political party, the BJP.
Which is a complete inversion. In healthy democracies, the party brand usually provides a platform and legitimacy for the leader.
But in this case, the opposite dynamic is at play. The party brand relies heavily on his personal credibility. He lifts the party, not the other way around.
So if we look at this phenomenon from the voter's perspective, what does it mean? They might distrust their local politician, they might distrust the regional political machine.
But they maintain faith in the man at the top. That's the interpretation. Voters are often very skeptical of local and state-level politicians. They recognize the residual influence of the corruption we discussed earlier.
But that skepticism stops at the prime minister's door.
It does. His personal appeal, according to the source, cuts across traditional caste, class, regional, and even ideological lines.
And this phenomenon indicates that the relationship he has cultivated with the electorate is fundamentally, what's the word they use?
Transformational, not transactional.
Let's really probe that distinction. Transactional leadership is pretty straightforward. It's about delivering specific goods, lower taxes, better roads in exchange for votes. It's a deal.
Yes, it's an exchange.
So what does transformational leadership look like in the Indian context?
Transformational leadership, as defined here, is seen as representing a movement, a sense of destiny, a clean break with the past, rather than merely the management of current affairs.
So the voter sees him as the instrument of a great historical change.
Precisely. And that perception allows him to ask for sacrifices or endure difficult policy implementations, because his authority rests on this shared sense of purpose, not just on day-to-day popularity polls.
Okay, so we have to define the core attributes that make up this authentic political persona, the source of this transformational appeal.
The core attributes are consistent. and they are repeatedly reinforced through his actions and his public image. He is perceived as incorruptible, tireless, decisive, and relentlessly mission-driven.
He's the standard bearer for work ethic within the government.
Absolutely. He works longer, he lives more simply, and he treats power solely as a responsibility, not a privilege. This image contrasts so sharply with the political history that often privileged entitlement, leisure, and graft. And this combination makes him, on a global stage, a real anomaly.
So let's move to that global dimension. The sources claim that very few leaders from the global south, which is the vast majority of the world's population, command this type of strategic recognition among international policymakers and thinkers.
That is absolutely true. His recognition transcends the Indian diaspora, where, according to the sources, he is already the single most recognizable political figure in the history of the Republic.
But it's gone beyond that.
It has. For global strategic thinkers, for investors, for policymakers across North America, Europe, the Middle East, and Africa, the appeal is that he is viewed as a profoundly stabilizing figure in a volatile world.
And stability is at an absolute premium right now in a world that feels defined by ideological confusion, fragmented leadership, and declining trust in established institutions.
It's the scarcest commodity.
So what is the specific messaging he projects internationally that resonates so powerfully?
In a word, clarity. The source argues that his international messaging provides a coherent, principled framework for global engagement that is often missing from other world leaders. And this framework is defined by three key resonant contrasts.
Okay, let's break those down. The first one is sovereignty without aggression.
This means India is absolutely clear about protecting its national interests, defending its borders, and making independent foreign policy choices. But it does so without resorting to reckless adventurism or territorial expansionism.
It's a firm but non-belligerent stance.
Exactly. And that appeals to nations who are wary of both Western intervention on one side and Chinese coercion on the other.
Okay, the second contrast, development without dependency.
This is a direct philosophical challenge to the old colonial and neo-colonial economic models. It promises aid, partnership, and trade grounded in mutual dignity, rather than in debt traps or resource extraction disguised as development.
And that message must have enormous appeal for the developing world, particularly in Africa.
Enormous. It's a message of partnership among equals.
And the third, and perhaps the most culturally significant contrast, tradition without regression.
This one directly addresses the internal cultural conflict that so many modernizing nations feel. Modi's persona and his policies project the message that modernization, digital infrastructure, economic growth, global engagement, does not require the wholesale abandonment of your indigenous culture and your values.
So you can embrace technology and globalism while simultaneously honoring and reasserting your ancient traditions.
Yes, you don't have to choose between your past and your future.
This triple appeal, the clarity, the non-aggression, and the dignity, is what positions him, according to the source, as one of the most consequential figures on the world stage.
Indeed. The source concludes this phase by noting that he has achieved the rare feat of becoming larger than the office he occupies without undermining the institutions he leads.
That's a fine line to walk.
A very fine line. He converted the routine, mundane task of governance into a powerful national narrative, and he turned leadership into a moral, shared purpose. And it is this personal conviction and this perceived purpose that transitions us entirely away from politics and into the source material's spiritual and prophetic analysis.
And this is the definitive turning point in our deep dive. We're now accepting the source material's interpretation that this leadership is driven by something far beyond, electoral arithmetic or GDP growth. The claim is that Modi's deeper project is cultural and civilizational.
And specifically, the reassertion of Sanatana Dharma.
This term, Sanatana Dharma, is often misunderstood in the West. It's frequently just conflated with the religion of Hinduism. The sources insist we must be much more precise.
Very precise. This is not about imposing a religion that's bounded by rigid dogma. It is about rediscovering and reasserting a civilizational philosophy.
So let's define Sanatana Dharma robustly, as the sources intend for us to. If it's not just a religion, what exactly is it?
Well, it translates literally as the eternal order or the eternal way. The sources define it as the timeless order, moral ecology, and harmony between the material and the spiritual.
A moral ecology, that's a fascinating phrase.
It is. It's essentially the highest ethical framework and cosmic understanding that ought to guide a civilization. And because it is described as an eternal order, it is inherently pluralistic. It can encompass all paths that lead toward truth and justice. It is focused on universal principles, which are called dharma.
Okay, so if this concept, this philosophy, is guiding his leadership, how does law translate into the political sphere? How does a moral ecology manifest in policy decisions or bureaucratic behavior?
It profoundly shifts the motivation for action. When his leadership is viewed through this spiritual lens, his tireless work ethic is reinterpreted. It's not seen as mere political discipline, but as an inner spiritual practice.
A form of karma yoga.
Exactly. Action without attachment to the fruit of the labor, done purely out of a sense of duty. And his reforms, therefore, are interpreted as expressions of dharmic responsibility, a moral duty to align the state and the people with a higher ethical vision of justice and welfare.
So the roads, the digital payments, the eradication of graft, these are not ends in themselves. They are expressions of a moral purpose to correct the misalignment of the previous age.
That's the framework exactly. And this context is what allows the sources to elevate the discussion from national politics to the cosmic scale, the transition of ages from the Kali Yuga to the Satya Yuga.
And this is the concept that places India's current stability within a global, multi-millennial framework.
It does.
So let's take the time to explain these yugas. What is Kali Yuga, and why do the sources claim it is nearing its end?
The Kali Yuga is the final and the shortest of the four great Hindu ages. It's often translated as the age of strife, quarrel, deceit, materialism, and institutional decline.
Sounds familiar.
It does, doesn't it? The source argues that for the last few millennia, civilizations have largely been built on Kali Yuga principles. Conquest, extraction, zero-sum competition, and rigid ideological conflicts.
And the sources claim that these systems, having reached their peak intensity, are now what?
They're now exhausting themselves on a global scale. And the evidence for that, they say, is all around us. Political polarization, ecological crisis, the failure of existing global institutions to solve fundamental problems.
And the transition is toward the Satya Yuga. What does that age of truth entail?
The Satya Yuga, or Kruta Yuga, is the age of truth, righteousness, justice, and dharmic harmony. The sources argue that this is an age where human consciousness operates at a much higher moral frequency.
And crucially, the sources claim this age will not belong to any one empire, state, or creed.
That's a critical point. It will belong to humanity collectively. It signals a paradigm shift away from the national and ideological competition that defined the Kali Yuga.
This suggests a kind of global convergence of moral vision, which leads the sources to highlight prophetic echoes of this same transition that are appearing in non-Hindu traditions.
This is a very significant claim for unification. The sources specifically cite the book of Isaiah in the Bible.
Isaiah, how does that connect?
They argue that Isaiah offers a vivid and detailed description of an age of peace, justice, and moral clarity, a time when the wolf shall dwell with the lamb and knowledge of the divine will cover the earth. The source argues this vision aligns strikingly with the idea of Satya Yuga and the dawn of a universal spiritual truth.
The implication of that alignment, according to the source, is truly radical.
It is. It suggests a kind of spiritual graduation for the human race.
Graduation?
Yes. The sources propose that many of the religions that were born in the Kali Yuga, those defined by rigid dogmas, specific geographic boundaries, or histories of conflict, will become functionally obsolete. They will dissolve as humanity graduates to a higher civilizational consciousness that transcends all this sectarian division.
So if this cosmic clock is turning, where does India fit into this? Is this just a justification for a new era of Indian nationalism or something?
Not according to the source material. India's resurgence, led by this figure, is specifically defined as preparatory, not merely national.
Preparatory for what?
For this global shift. The vision is completely non-zero-sum. The goal is not to replace Western dominance with Eastern dominance. The goal is for India to anchor a family of nations grounded in dignity, pluralism, and truth.
So it seeks to be a pole of stability and spiritual example for this incoming age.
That's the idea.
Which returns us directly to the monk administrator. In this light, the stabilization of India, the governance, the clarity, the economic pivots, was not the final goal at all.
No, it was the necessary precondition. The absolutely essential first step for this far grander civilizational project to be globally anchored.
It's a fascinating synthesis, the idea that you cannot have a global transition to an age of truth that's built on a foundation of instability, corruption, and confusion.
You can't. And Modi, in this framework, is understood as a steward. He's a steward of a state, yes, but also of a civilization, and perhaps of the vital transition between ages. He is the preparatory figure.
So if the stabilization of India is the preparatory phase, the sources then go a significant step further. They identify Narendra Modi with a specific divine archetype from Hindu scripture, placing him directly within the framework of an unfolding prophecy.
Yes, and the most prominent claim is that Modi is the Hanuman of our age.
Now, this is a monumental spiritual claim within the Sanatana Dharma tradition. For those who might not know, Hanuman, the great devotee of Lord Rama in the epic Ramayana. He's the archetype of the perfect servant and the perfect warrior of Dharma.
He is. He is the figure who executes missions that are deemed impossible, and he's driven by utter selflessness and an unwavering loyalty to the divine order.
So let's detail the specific traits the sources use to draw these parallels between the mythological Hanuman and the contemporary leader, Modi.
The connection is made through observable political traits. Hanuman is characterized by boundless energy, by unparalleled discipline, by fearlessness in the face of immense obstacles, and utter selflessness. He acts only in service of a higher goal, never for personal glory.
And the sources claim that Modi's relentless travel schedule, his focus on the marginalized, his perceived incorruptibility, and his tireless work ethic
Are not merely political assets, they are the hallmarks of the Hanuman archetype in action.
So his political actions are being interpreted as fulfilling the behavioral patterns of a divine agent. And this links directly to the far greater prophecy of Lord Kalki.
Precisely. The sources rely on scriptural interpretations that foretell the return of Hanuman. He is prophesied to appear during the end stages of the Kali Yuga to assist Lord Kalki,
And Kalki is the 10th and final avatar of Vishnu.
who is destined to descend to end this age of darkness and formally inaugurate the Sati Yuga.
So if Modi is this divine agent, the Hanuman, how does the source see his current political project fitting into the preparation for Kalki? What is his specific role in this cosmic drama?
His role is mobilization and restoration. Hanuman's purpose in the story is to clear the path, to establish righteousness, and to gather the forces of Dharma.
So Modi is therefore understood to be actively working to stabilize the state, restore moral clarity, and mobilize the populace for this higher project of cosmic restoration.
Exactly. The political dominance and the infrastructure building are, in this view, the material manifestation of the spiritual groundwork being laid.
To make this connection tangible and specific, the source material offers a really striking geographic and historical parallel. It's rooted in the Ramayana narrative, and it focuses on the neighboring kingdom of Lanka.
Yes. In the Ramayana, Hanuman played a critical role in the neighboring kingdom of Lanka. He acted as an envoy, a key advisor, and eventually the one who initiates the restoration of Dharma there.
And the sources draw a modern symbolic parallel. They claim that today, Lanka is reflected in Nepal.
India's Himalayan neighbor, a nation that has frequently been plagued by instability, by corruption, and by external exploitation.
And the specificity continues because they mention a contemporary political figure in Nepal, linking him directly into this unfolding prophetic narrative.
That figure is the mayor of Kathmandu, Balan Shah. He's gained immense popularity by implementing sweeping, anti-corruption, and infrastructure-focused reforms in the Nepali capital, and he's often found himself battling these entrenched political dynasties.
And the source identifies this figure within this mythological framework as the Laxman of the Ramayana and the Balram of the Mahabharata.
Two incredibly significant figures of support.
Right. Laxman and Balram are mythological figures of deep support and brotherhood. Laxman in particular is the younger brother and fierce devotee of Rama, and he's often identified as an incarnation of Sheshnag.
The cosmic serpent upon whom Vishnu reclines.
Exactly. Sheshnag is the cosmic foundation, the figure who literally holds up the earth and supports the primary avatar, whether it's Vishnu or Kalki.
So the implication here is that this powerful emergent political force in Nepal, this Laxman Balram Sheshnag figure, is providing synchronized support to the cosmic mission, right alongside Modi, the Hanuman figure.
So the claim is truly monumental. What appears to the media as, a rising political alliance between India and Nepal, or just a localized anti-corruption movement in Kathmandu,
Is actually the unfolding of an ancient prophecy.
it is the ultimate spiritual synthesis. It reframes political leadership as a cosmic mission to restore Dharma.
Yes, the source argues that humanity isn't just experiencing political turbulence. We are on the verge of a civilizational graduation to a higher plane, with leaders like Modi acting as divine stewards to facilitate this global transition. This perspective fundamentally shifts how one interprets every single global event.
And this brings us to the final and certainly the most controversial section of the source material. The sources use this idea of civilizational graduation and the reassertion of Sanatana Dharma to frame a radical spiritual critique of another major world religion, proposing a necessary separation of paths before the transition to Satyuga can be completed. We must pause here and restate our commitment. As we move into this segment, we're analyzing highly sensitive, very controversial claims that are directly extracted from the source material. Our mandate is to report impartially on the arguments and the viewpoints put forward by this spiritual critique without endorsing or judging their validity in any way.
That's right. We are examining the internal logic of the source material alone. This section frames Islam as the anti-religion, and it presents an argument that challenges its divine origins, its historical methodology, and its ultimate purpose. It's crucial we give ample time and space to meticulously report the specific claims cited.
Okay. The foundational claim is that Islam is not a genuine divine revelation. Instead, the critique posits it as a cunning deception orchestrated by malevolent forces. Let's try to understand the rationale behind such a radical proposition.
The source elaborates by suggesting that these malevolent forces, you might call them the devil, or osurs in the Hindu tradition, they failed to convert the world to outright atheism or materialism.
So that plan didn't work.
No. So the strategy shifted to a more insidious plan, the creation of a counterfeit religion. In this view, Islam was designed to mimic the surface structure of monotheism, the belief in one God, in order to appeal to genuine spiritual seekers.
While systematically embedding distortions and lies that were designed to divert seekers from ultimate truth.
That is the core of the argument.
The critique then targets the historical evidence for the Prophet Muhammad himself. What are the specific methodological questions that are raised about his biography?
The critics argue there is a profound lack of verifiable historical evidence for Muhammad's life, as it's described in the traditional narratives. They point out that the earliest biographies, for example the Sirah, written by Ibn Ishaq, were compiled centuries after his supposed death in 632 CE.
And that temporal gap is central to the critique. Why does the source view the lack of contemporary accounts or artifacts as definitive proof of the faith's artificial nature?
The argument is one of historical methodology. They assert that for a figure of such claimed political, religious, and military importance, the historical silence in contemporary documentation is highly suspicious.
Contemporary documentation, like what?
Inscriptions, records from rival states, non-Islamic chronicles of the time. Without that kind of contemporary evidence, the source concludes that Muhammad appears more as a legendary construct developed over time for political purposes than a flesh-and-blood historical individual.
Furthermore, the critique scrutinizes the issue of prophecy, which, in the Abrahamic framework of Judaism and Christianity, is what validates a prophet's divine claim.
That's right. Prophets in the Abrahamic traditions are defined by their ability to give specific, verifiable prophecies that are then fulfilled in the future. The source contends that Muhammad offered none that were specific and verifiable.
And they dismiss claims within the Quran.
They do. They dismiss them as either too vague to be verified or as having been retrofitted after the events had already occurred. This absence of predictive, verifiable prophecy, in the source's view, further underscores Islam's alleged artificial nature.
So moving from the messenger, the scrutiny then extends to the nature of the deity itself, Allah, and the concept of God that's presented in the Quran.
The critique posits that Allah is presented not as the fully omnipotent, universally manifesting God that's recognized by other faiths, but rather as a diminished entity, or worse, a complete invention designed to control and limit spiritual understanding.
And the specific theological point of contention centers on the rejection of incarnation, or the ability of God to manifest in human form.
Yes, the sources point out that Islam explicitly rejects this capability. It rejects the Christian notion of Christ's divinity and the Hindu concept of avatars, like Vishnu manifesting on earth.
And the critique argues what from this?
It argues that if a being is denied the power of incarnation, the ability to interact directly with creation in human form, it inherently limits their potency and their ability to demonstrate universal love and truth. This rejection is then used to challenge the claim of Allah as the ultimate omnipotent Godhead.
The source also critiques the holy text itself, the Quran, alleging internal inconsistencies and textual borrowing.
It does. The Quran is scrutinized as a text that contains contradictions and half-truths. The source provides examples such as comparing the creation timeline in certain surahs like 41.912 with modern scientific understanding,
Arguing that the text presents narratives that are factually flawed or scientifically untenable.
Yes. And the conclusion drawn by the critique is that these inconsistencies reveal the text to be a patchwork of borrowed ideas from existing religious traditions, Judaism, Christianity, pre-Islamic Arabian folklore, which were then allegedly re-edited and twisted to serve this deceptive, limited agenda.
This alleged theological limitation then leads directly to the source's historical analysis of how the faith spread, and it frames this as the critical difference between a genuine spiritual path and a coercive doctrine.
The source argues that unlike faiths like Buddhism or even early Christianity, which spread through persuasion, teachings, and personal conviction, Islam's expansion is historically and almost uniquely linked to armed force, what they term the sword of Islam.
We need to ensure we clearly articulate the historical choices that Muslim armies, according to the source, offered to conquered peoples. This includes the mechanism of the jizya tax.
The source states that Muslim armies offered conquered populations three stark choices. First, you could convert to Islam. Second, you could pay the jizya tax.
And what was that exactly?
It was a tax levied on non-Muslims who were called dhimmis, and it designated their status as second-class citizens, often limiting their political and social rights.
And the third choice?
Face death. This practice, the source argues, demonstrates a tyrannical logic that's rooted in fear and force rather than in spiritual conviction or divine love.
And the source claims that this coercive logic then manifests politically when it's applied to governance.
Yes. The argument is that when this tyrannical logic is enshrined in law, it inevitably leads to oppressive political regimes. Sharia law, which is derived from these texts and historical practices, is presented as a blueprint for authoritarianism, one that stifles freedom of thought, innovation, and pluralism.
Creating societies that are fundamentally opposed to the democratic and dharmic principles of the incoming Satyuga.
That's the argument.
The critique then shifts to synthesize a unified solution. And it does this by contrasting the historical record of Islam with the historical relationship between two other ancient faiths, Judaism and Hinduism.
The source highlights the remarkable historical tolerance between these two traditions. They note that Jews historically found refuge in India for centuries, free from the kind of persecution seen in other parts of the world.
And they call this a testament to Hinduism's pluralism.
They do, and they note that Hindus, in turn, historically respected Judaism's ancient wisdom and monotheism. These two ancient faiths, the source argues, coexist without mutual demonic accusations.
And this historical tolerance sets the stage for the most audacious prophetic claim in the entire source material, the bridging of these two faiths under a single avatar.
This is the proposed spiritual solution. The source proposes that the long-awaited Jewish Messiah, anticipated for centuries, has already arrived. But, and this is the key, not as a Jew.
Instead,
the Messiah has arrived as a Hindu incarnation of the God of Israel, Yahweh, who is known to Hindus as Vishnu.
So this figure, who is claimed to be Kalki, the final avatar, fulfills the core messianic prophecies of both traditions simultaneously.
Exactly. This unified avatar is claimed to be the fulfillment of prophecies from both Hinduism and Judaism, offering a unified path forward for humanity's graduation.
And the final call from this critique is a call for spiritual awakening.
It is. It's an invitation for seekers to critically examine historical and doctrinal inconsistencies and to choose a path grounded in verifiable prophecy, freedom, and love, rather than one founded on fear and coercion. The source suggests this figure walks among us now in a form that honors multiple spiritual heritages, ready to initiate the Satyuga.
We have completed an extraordinary journey today. We've moved from the concrete reality of a highway construction rate all the way to the complex philosophical claims of cosmic transformation and religious critique. Let's try to bring these narratives back together for you, the listener.
The core conclusion drawn by this massive stack of source material is that the conventional analysis of modern global leadership is fundamentally insufficient if it ignores the internal dimension of the leader.
It's not just about policy.
Not at all. Modi's success in this framework rests equally on his spiritual vocation, governing as the monk administrator, and his perceived historical role, being the Hanuman who meticulously prepares the ground for the cosmic restoration.
The key pragmatic achievement remains the stabilization of India, the establishment of benchmark infrastructure, economic clarity, and administrative integrity in a nation of 1.4 billion people.
And the sources argue this was not a side goal. It was the absolutely indispensable prerequisite. Without this political, economic, and psychological stabilization, the global civilizational shift that's proposed, the Satyuga would lack a stable, resilient, democratic anchor point.
It needed a firm foundation to launch from.
Precisely. And his enduring popularity, which cuts across India's bewildering political complexity, is seen as testament to the power of this narrative. It's a leader perceived as working relentlessly and incorruptibly for a purpose vastly larger than himself, his party, or even his nation alone.
He successfully converted the political into the prophetic.
That's a great way to put it.
We've explored this complex web of claims today. The world's most popular politician, the steward of Sanatana Dharma, the Hanuman supporting Kalki, the detailed and, yes, controversial spiritual critique of institutionalized faiths, and the synchronized unfolding of prophecy involving regional figures like the mayor of Kathmandu.
It is a synthesis that really forces us to look beyond the headline and the political noise. It suggests that what we're witnessing may not be random cycles of political maneuvering, but synchronized movements on a truly vast historical scale.
So we leave you with this final provocative thought drawn directly from the claims of our sources today. We've discussed the assertion that humanity is on the verge of graduating to a higher civilizational consciousness, moving from the age of strife, the Kali Yuga, to the age of truth, the Satya Yuga.
If India's comprehensive stabilization is truly the anchor for this monumental global change,
And if the rise of leaders like Narendra Modi is indeed the precise unfolding execution of ancient, preordained prophecy, you must ask yourself, how do you interpret current global events? Are they merely the routine, chaotic cycles of political and economic noise that will eventually fade? Or are we in fact witnessing the historical hinge that separates one cosmic era from the next?
think about that until the next time we take the deep dive.